Hello, everybody, and welcome to Intro to Psychology or General Psychology, depending upon the program that you're taking this class through. My name is Christopher Gotti. I will be your instructor for the class, as well as the narrator for the videos that you're going to be watching throughout this course. I'd love to welcome you to the class officially. I really hope you're going to get a lot out of it. And what we're going to be doing in today's first video is just giving you a broad overview of what this course will entail, how some of the grading will unfold, and also some of the things that you want to be mindful of as you progress through this online course throughout the entirety of the semester or session that you're taking this class in. So let's get started. I think one of the best places to start when going over this course is just to give you the lay of the land of what you're going to be covering throughout the entirety of the class. I know in in-person classes it's a lot easier because you have a weekly schedule, you know exactly when you need to show up, what needs to be done while you're there, and exactly kind of what's going to unfold in each and every time you walk into class. It's a little different when you're in an online course. You don't have weekly meetings, at least you typically don't have weekly meetings. You don't necessarily have a clear-cut layout of exactly what's going to be done to cover the material, and that can cause a lot of confusion. So, as I mentioned, going over what this course is going to entail should be a really good place to start. In terms of this class, what I'm going to be doing is presenting you 15 different modules. These modules in a typical semester will be linked to specific weeks. In compacted sessions, like summer sessions or other things, the module might just be a couple days of time. But within each of these modules, you are going to have stuff that's due and different things that you're going to be exposed to. 12 of the modules are going to be like a typical week in school, where you're going to get presentation material, you're going to have assignments, and you're going to approach this stuff the same way you would approach it in a typical class, just through different formats and different avenues to kind of go over the things that are covered. You also have within those 15 modules, 3 modules that are dedicated to midterm exams. Those midterm exams are going to cover their own specific things, and we're going to go over the details of what the exams will entail a little bit later. But just know that the 12 material-based weeks or material-based modules and the 3 exam-based weeks or modules are going to be what this class is actually designed around. And if you want to be successful in this class, one of the really critical things that you want to be mindful of as you progress is that you need to stay on top of these modules. Do not fall behind. If you start getting yourself in a point where you're working on module 3 when it's module 4 time and module 4 when it's module 5 time, your ability to complete the class and to be successful is greatly hindered. So just look through the class syllabus, what's being covered in each module, and make sure that you really have a sense of when things need to be done and kind of how we're going to progress. And that should really help you be successful in the class. With respect to the material modules, in addition to having presentations and other things that we're going to go over a little bit later linked to each module, there's also going to be readings assigned to each module. And for you to be able to go over those readings, you obviously need access to the linked textbook for the course. The book that you're going to need to get or rent is the Introduction to Psychology book by James Callatt. But the edition of the textbook that you're required to get might vary from semester to semester or from location to location. So I encourage you, so you can make sure that you get the right book, to go to the class syllabus or maybe even your school bookstore and figure out what edition of the textbook is being currently required for the class. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need to get the exact edition that's being listed. You usually can get away with getting a slightly older edition if money or time is an issue, but you do want to make sure that you get that textbook as soon as possible. My usually rule of thumb for this particular class is that students do best are the ones that do the readings before watching the presentations. It really can help you process the material significantly better, and it can give you a second voice, which is paramount in a class like this, where there's so much information that's covered, and there's so many different ways to kind of perceive that information. Usually the difference between an A and a B student is that the A student usually did a lot more readings than the B student, and the difference between a B student and a C student is that the C student probably didn't read at all or did very minimal readings. It really can help you get over that hump if you want to learn the material better and be more successful in the class if you get that textbook. And in terms of getting the textbook, I do strongly suggest that you try to get it as soon as possible. I can provide you the first chapter of the textbook on the class website, which should already be there. But after that, because of copyright issues and other issues around being able to kind of use the right textbook, I can't provide you anything more than that. So if you can, make sure after you're done watching this presentation that you look at your bookstore or you look in the information in the online site so you can figure out exactly what you need to do to get the textbook, and you start procuring that as soon as possible, because this is something that can really help you be successful in a class like this. In terms of how you're going to be graded, since I've kind of alluded to that a couple times now, your grade in this particular class will be based on the 3 midterm exams that you take. In addition to that, you do have 12 session assignments or module assignments that you will need to complete that are all worth 15 points apiece. And then you do have an extra credit option for this course that we're going to discuss later called Forum Posts, which is essentially a way of trying to kind of mimic what you would get in an in-person class, where people have the ability to exchange ideas and ask questions of each other in a more kind of informal format, something that's not that easy to replicate here in these online classes. I promise we'll get to that specific element a little bit more. And the assignments a little bit more, but I figure we could start with just discussing the exams first. So in terms of the exams, there will be 3, as I mentioned, exams in this class. Each of them is going to be worth 60 points, and these exams are considered non-cumulative. What that essentially means is they're going to have their own respective material tied to them, and we're not going to go back into previous material when getting into exams 2 and 3. You're essentially, for exam 1, going to have the first 4 modules covered on that exam. For exam 2, you're going to have modules 5 through 8, or I guess you could say 6 through 9 if you're counting the first exam as the 5th module, and so on. There's not going to be overlap in the material when you're taking the exams. These exams can be taken with your notes. They can be taken with the book, but I do not want to hear about any collaboration between students or any unethical behavior outside of just kind of using your own material for these exams. I know that being able to use your notes and being able to use your books might seem like this is kind of a prime opportunity to easily take these exams even if you don't know much information. But I do need to warn you that historically this class has been really tough for students when it comes to taking the exams. And that's because I think a lot of students understudy for the exams. They don't think that they need to prepare for these the same way they prepare for other exams, because they think they get their notes and their book. But this exam is intentionally designed to ask questions that are more application based and to keep you within a time constraint, so you can't just look up answers to every single question, especially if you don't know where the information for those answers are actually located. There are 45 multiple choice-ish, 45-ish multiple choice questions on the exam, and you'll have 60 minutes to take this exam. That is not ample time to look up every answer. It's also not ample time to be able to try to read the material for each section that you maybe don't know answers to. So you want to be mindful of that as you go into these exams. Preparation for these is really essential if you want to be successful in them. And I strongly suggest to students that you treat these exams just like you would treat an exam for any in-person class. You need to study a lot by going over the readings, by going over the presentations and the slides linked to them if you want to be successful, even with the ability to use your notes and books on these exams. Going back to the grading scheme again, each exam being worth 60 points, it makes this portion of your grade add up to 180 out of the 360 total points possible. We'll talk a little bit more about the grade breakdown as we progress, but now I want to turn our attention to the other major component to the class, and that's the write-up assignments. As was covered earlier, there are 12 different write-up modules that we have. You will have an assignment that is due, and each of those assignments is worth 15 points. These are going to be due at 10 p.m., whatever your time is, so Pacific, Central, whatever the standard time is where this class is assigned. They're due at 10 p.m., and they are due on the class site. There's plagiarism checkers in place to make sure that you're not copying and pasting things. There's a very specific deadline that's in place, so you can't turn something in a minute or two late and just kind of slip it under the pile. So you got to be mindful of your time, and you got to be mindful of where you're pulling up information when you're doing these posts. In terms of what these posts are going to be about, it will vary from module to module. Some of them will ask you to discuss things that you found interesting. Others will ask you to cover the entire module as a summary to kind of help you study the material and be able to process it at a deeper level. Others will ask you to go over very specific elements to the material and either critique it or kind of explain how these things work. Additionally, almost every single module that's assigned has some application-based question to it at the end. And when you're doing all of these posts, there usually will be a guideline as to roughly how much you should write when covering things, but those guidelines are a little loose. I'm always okay with people writing more than what's suggested in those posts, but what's really critical is that you make sure that you cover things that are related to the material and that you cover things in depth. So don't just kind of give a brief response. Don't give responses that are just kind of, I guess, fluffing over what's been discussed. You want to make sure that you really are giving a great amount of detail in your responses to these write-ups if you want to get the full 15 points. You will be provided some general feedback for your posts every time you put them up. It will be graded after they're due, but you know the kind of general issue with most of these posts that students struggle with is they're either not providing enough detail or they're not providing responses that really show comprehension of the material that was covered. So just be mindful of this as you progress. As I also alluded to earlier, there's one other component to this class that you do want to keep in mind, and it's these forum posts that are linked to each module that we cover. Each module has a lot of material that's covered within it, and it tends to evoke different ideas, different issues that people tend to want to discuss. Now, in an in-person class, I typically allow students to cover these things, interject when we cover a specific idea or get their opinions about stuff. In an online class like this, it's really tough to do that. So what I've tried to do to kind of emulate that discussion that you would typically have in an in-person class is give you a forum to post responses to general questions or post your own questions and responses to other people's questions, just like you would have in an in-person class. You're not required to make these posts. Historically, we have had some issues when asking people to post these things and when they don't really want to post things. So I'm making this an entirely optional component to this class, but if you are keeping up with this, I do want to give you some sort of reward for it. So what I'm going to do at the very end of the semester is look over the forms. I'll be kind of checking in constantly throughout the semester, the class, just to kind of double check that there's no problems with it. At the very end, I'll look at your participation in these things, and you can earn up to 1 extra credit point per module if you've been participating in the forums within its assigned time slot. It doesn't mean that at the very end of the semester that you can just kind of post everything randomly from past forums that you didn't participate in before. But if you are keeping up with the forum posts, allowing that dialogue to continue in the class like you would have in an in-person class, you will get that reward at the end of the semester. I will tabulate these things though by hand. I'm not going to post the extra credit on the class site, but I guarantee you when your grade is tabulated by me, when I'm entering in your final grade for the course registrar, I will look at your forum posts and you can earn up to 12 extra credit points if you are continually participating in those forums in a way that shows that you're putting in an effort. And on that same note, if you are participating in these things, make sure that you're not only talking about the material, you're not only really kind of showing thought, but that you're being mindful of your classmates. Try to not directly address anybody in a way that could be considered aggressive. Try not to make any comments that could offend other individuals or could really upset people if you are going to participate in these forums. It's a very sensitive topic sometimes when we get into psychology. And I do really want people to have the ability to communicate with others, but I don't want that to evolve into something that could be problematic for people. So please, if you are going to do this, be mindful of those things as you progress. But I do encourage you, if you are willing to do it, to participate in these forums. Now, as I've alluded to a couple times now in this class, one of the biggest issues that students have in these online courses is they fall behind to a point where they just have no ability to get through the information in time or to process the information the same way they should if they were, say, taking this class in person. So for this particular class, one of the things that I'm going to keep banging into your heads over and over again is that you cannot, under any circumstances in this class, procrastinate if you want to be successful. And to try to dissuade you from procrastination, I do everything I can with my background in operant conditioning and other experiences to try to prevent you from doing that. In terms of what that means for you now, just know that I do not treat late work very well. I do have very set deadlines for the assignments and deadlines for the exams, and since this class is run on an online site, those things can be absolute, where if you submit write-ups, not even a minute late, but just a second late, those things will be marked as late, and you will get the late submission deduction. And this is regardless of what caused those late submissions to happen. I know many of you throughout the entire semester will have things happen in your families, or things happen at work, or things happen in your personal life. And those things can definitely take their toll on you and prevent you from getting stuff done at the time that you've wanted to do them. So to kind of circumvent these problems, one of the best ways to be successful in this class is to get stuff done early. Assignments do not have to be posted the day that they're due. They don't have to be done minutes before they have to be submitted. You can easily get these assignments done days in advance. You can take the exams days in advance. That way, if something random happens at home or something random happens at work or to you, you can get past those things and still get this stuff done on time. I know that late deductions, like taking half credit off of assignments or not letting you take exams if you can't take them within the framework time, might seem harsh, but this is something that is critical for a class like this. Once students start to slide in these online classes, things tend to go south fast. And it's my job as your instructor to try to prevent that from happening. So there will be zero exceptions on this. And I know that this is going to cause some angst for some of you and cause many people to kind of dislike me as the semester progresses, and I stay true to this warning. But to ensure that not only are you getting the right material and you're keeping up with it, but also to ensure that you are going to be prepared for future classes. If you did take this course and get a good grade in it, I'm going to really hold to these timelines. So be sure that you're staying on top of stuff and that you're avoiding late work in this particular class, something that can be challenging in these online courses. So when revisiting all of this stuff that we've covered so far, you should probably be able to kind of add things up in your head, but just so we have it on paper, this class is based on the exams and assignments out of 360 points. Half the points will be allocated to the exams, half the points to the assignments that you'll have, and you can get a couple extra points, as I mentioned, with those forum posts. In fact, with the forum posts being worth up to 12 points and the class being out of 360 points, forum posts are actually worth 3.3333% of your grade. In terms of how to get a grade out of that 360 points, I'm just going to be grading on the basic percentage scale that you probably have encountered in most of your classes. I do not curve this class in any way, shape, or form. It means I'm not curving the assignments, I'm not curving the exams. You essentially are getting your grade based on what you did. There's way too much individual movement in this class from course to course, and there's too many unknowns to base your grade off of what others in the class are doing. So just know that your grade is just based on your performance. And in terms of how the grade breakdowns work, A's will be somewhere in the 90s, B's in the 80s, C's in the 70s, and D's in the 60s. If you get below 60%, unfortunately, I will need to fail you from in this class. I'm hoping that we can get as many A's in this class as possible, not B's. But obviously, your performance will dictate where your grade lies. In terms of how you can check where exactly you're at, I encourage you to, again, go to the syllabus. Make sure you know when things are due. Make sure you know what's covered. Make sure you know the breakdowns of the grades even a little bit more. If you kind of look at the syllabus, it'll go into more details on these things. And while you're progressing in the class, you can check out how many points you've earned so you can get a sense of where you are grade-wise. I don't want students to necessarily obsess about grades, but I do always want you to be aware of where you lie and what that's indicating in terms of what I think you've kind of been able to process in the class. It is sometimes hard in a class like this to earn an A, but there will be people in this course that get it. And it's hard to kind of come back if you do start getting major points taken off. So kind of taking stock of where you are throughout the entire semester, how this is impacting your grade, is something I always encourage my students to do, because grades are meant to kind of represent what you learned, and there might be a point, if you're doing well or struggling, that you kind of want to know about that so you can figure out how you're going to plot your course throughout the entirety of the class. Now that we've covered exactly how you're going to be graded in the class and a couple overviews of how the course is going to be set up, it's probably important to talk about the course material and what we'll actually be addressing in this class. Introduction to Psychology courses can go a number of different ways. Some researchers or instructors tend to focus on current topics, things that are really pertinent in discussions or things that relate to real-world events. Others take a focus on kind of the historical development of psychology. My aim in this class is to kind of find a happy medium between those two approaches. I know leaving this class, you will be expected to have an understanding of some of the basic areas covered in psychology, as well as some of the major terms and some of the major figures that shaped psychology and what it is today. But to understand where psychology's gone, I do also like to cover what's relatively current research or current ideas that have been shaping the field of psychology over the last couple decades, or last couple years even for that matter. So in this class, what you should expect to encounter is kind of a combination of history and current events with respect to the broad field of psychology. But as we go through this journey, it's really important that you keep in mind that there are some things that we're going to be discussing that are somewhat controversial. To understand how we got to things like clinical psychology or personality psychology or developmental psych, we first have to start by covering some of the early monumental figures that shaped those branches of psychology. And when we do that, when we cover those historical figures, we're going to be getting into some terms and concepts that are somewhat controversial or even at this point have been disproven. It's not that I want you to think that all of psychology is a theoretical debate where lots of things are getting shut down, but what I want you to understand when we cover these individuals is that there were roots to pretty much every branch of psychology that's formed, and understanding where we are now is really built on understanding where we started from. So when we cover those individuals, being able to separate theory from fact and research from just objective, what's the word I'm looking for? Just kind of concept, that's not the word I was looking for, but you understand what I'm getting at, is really critical. But even when we do transition to the science, another thing that you really want to keep in mind is that in psychology, we're dealing with a social science, not a hard science or a natural science. What that means is when we talk about specific effects happening or certain things seeming to pan out in research, it doesn't mean the things that we're looking at are universal. They apply to everybody or they happen the exact same way every single time. We'll get into things like personality psychology as we progress and talk about specific traits and ways we can measure individuals. But when we do that and link these things to things like development or other facets of our lives, it's really important to note that those links aren't universally applied to everybody. So it's not like everybody who's extroverted does certain things in certain moments or has become extroverted in the exact same way. This also applies to things like developmental psychology when we talk about milestones that people tend to kind of reach at specific ages. It's not that everybody learns to do something at exactly age 2 or age 5. There's lots of variations from person to person that have to be taken into account when we try to study these things as psychologists. In fact, one of my favorite examples of how varied these effects can be actually came from an older version of your textbook. I'm not sure if your current version of the Cowlitz Introduction to Psychology textbook discusses this anymore, but in the past, what the textbook covered was this really weird phenomenon where researchers in social psychology started to recognize that there was something we could use to predict things like which college you would be interested in or who you might be more attracted to. And the predictor that was linked to it was kind of unexpected. It was a person's own name. It was research that showed that there were a lot of Smiths marrying Smiths, way too many for it to be just chance. And there were a lot of people going to Cal with the name of Cal, or going there with the name of even Catherine, just because the first two letters of the name were the same as Cal. And these really interesting findings speak to how varied the effects are when we talk about our social sciences. Obviously, not everybody attending the University of Nebraska happens to have a name that starts with N, or I guess U for that matter. It's not actually that common for those overlaps to happen, but they're happening more often than we would expect, to the point where we can call them an effect in our social sciences, just not one that applies to everybody. And if you can keep that notion in mind, in addition to kind of separating out the theory from the research, that should really position you well to be able to digest this material and use it in future classes that might require some of the things that we're going to be covering in this class. And in terms of what you should be leaving this class with, my hope is that if you can get through the entire course, you can really benefit a lot from it, regardless of whether or not you're intending to be a psychology major or not. Obviously, most people who sign up for this class sign up for it because it's a requirement. And to get a degree in most programs nowadays, a general psychology course or an introduction to psychology course is one of those just prerequisites for finishing and getting through almost every major out there. But it doesn't require you to just kind of slog through it because it's some random thing that's asked of you. Really, when we ask people to take this class, the goal for most institutions is twofold. For people who are just taking this class and having no intention of getting into the major, belief is that taking this class can really help individuals learn more about themselves, learn more about the world around them, and possibly apply some of the things that we're covering in this class to whatever profession they eventually find themselves in. There's also a reason why many schools require people to take this course during their freshman or sophomore years at their undergraduate institution. Usually, lots of people, when they're starting off in college, tend to be inundated with a lot of basic introductory classes that can require a lot of rudimentary work and really can be sort of overwhelming. This class is designed to be somewhat enjoyable, and there should be lots of real world applications to every concept that we cover. There's lots of really interesting names that we get to discuss and interesting ideas that hopefully you can spend some time grappling with. And most colleges recognize that if you can get college students in their freshman or sophomore years to start wrestling with this stuff, to start trying to digest it, it might not only make things a little bit more exciting during the first year or two, but it might really help these students prepare for future classes that are going to get much more intense and much more detail oriented. So, major or not, I'm hoping as you go through this class, you can start to build those skill sets. So, to kind of recognize your real life connections to this material and to develop some of the skills that you'll need to progress into future classes. If you are thinking about psychology as a major, there's also two additional benefits. One of the things that I've designed this class to do is really get you ready for some of those upper division classes. You'll be writing posts and taking tests in ways that are really going to emulate a lot of your future classes that you'll take in psychology. And they'll allow you to also get a sense of what classes you could potentially pursue. We're going to be covering a lot of different areas of psychology in this class. And when people get a degree in psychology, it's not often just a general degree that they get, but one that specializes in something, maybe in social psychology or clinical psych or something else. And as you progress through this class, my hope is that as you're developing your skills, you're also getting a sense of what resonates best with you, what thing you might pursue after you're done with a course like this. Again, if you're going through this class and trying to be successful, and if having a sense of where you should land after you're done might really help you in that process. And I hope you can think of these things as we progress. Another thing that's probably worth mentioning in this class as we get started is that this class is indeed really hard. It's not necessarily designed to be one of the most challenging classes that you can take. In fact, it's usually considered one of the easier first year classes that people at four-year schools take if they take the in-person version of the class. But online classes in their own design kind of suck for college students. They're challenging because they're asking you to keep yourself on a schedule, not with the schedule where there's something carved out on kind of just an inherent timeline, but one that you are setting for yourself. It means finding time to watch these videos, finding the ability to avoid distractions and other problems while you're trying to go through this material can sometimes be a little daunting for college students, especially because oftentimes people come into these online classes with the perception that they just have to be significantly easier than the in-person classes. And the perception tends to lead to effort that's really not on level with what you would do in an in-person class. And that's not something that will fly in this particular course. If you get through this class, you can leave knowing that you got through a class that's the equivalent of an in-person introduction to psychology class that's offered at any major four-year institute. I think I've mentioned that earlier. And that means that you'll have the skill sets, the knowledge that would be expected of you as you progress. But to get through that information, to kind of be able to acquire what you need, a lot of weight is put on your shoulders in these online classes. And for you to be successful, keeping in mind that you really do have to be diligent in keeping up with the readings, watching the presentations in full, keeping yourself to a timeline is really going to be something that's a challenge. So if you can be mindful of where you are in the class, when things need to be done, how you best can navigate through all the different things that are entailed, it really will help you be successful as you progress through. But can sometimes, to many students, again, be tough, be really challenging in comparison to those in-person classes that you might have had before. And if you're looking for how you can maybe help yourself, I always like to stress that there are some tips and some techniques that students have used in the past that really help them thrive. I've mentioned a couple times before that checking the syllabus is really important for readings and knowing what's on the horizon when it comes to different tests or different things that you're going to encounter. Students that do well are the ones that really have the syllabus committed to memory. They know what everything is worth, they know when things are due, and they have a general sense of how everything's going to play out in the class. If you can familiarize yourself with the syllabus not only today, but multiple times throughout the semester, it should help you be significantly more successful in the class. Another thing that I've mentioned before, but is, I guess, requiring a second comment on, is that you do want to keep up with the readings. I will not be looking over your shoulder as you're doing readings. Some of the posts don't even require you necessarily to talk about something specific to the readings, but students that are the most successful tend to be the ones that are constantly doing the readings, regardless of whether or not they're rewarded for doing those things at that moment. So if you can really do your best to not only know what readings are assigned for each module, but also to keep up with them and potentially even do them before you watch the presentations, you should find yourself in a good place when it comes to the exams and when it comes to that point where you're done with the class and you check how much information you've actually retained. Another thing that can really help you in this class is that you not only just take notes while watching the videos, but you take notes on the lecture slides. I'm trying this semester to get you the lecture slides for this class, so as you're watching these videos, you can take notes in them and try to keep up with the material in a way that helps you process the information at a deeper level while you're watching it and also allows you to review the information after you're done. Another thing that's very closely linked to that is that when you are going through these presentations, when you're doing the readings, you need to make sure that you find a way to avoid distractions. These things will pop up constantly. And trying to watch these videos in a coffee shop or trying to do these things with family members can sometimes be challenging. They can sometimes be circumvented if you do these in a place where you can take frequent breaks, which brings me to another point, and that's that for you to be successful in this class, as I've mentioned multiple times now, avoiding procrastination is big. Right? If you do have to watch these videos in a coffee shop, take multiple breaks while you're watching these things. If you have to do it with your family or write these posts with your family, find the adequate time you need to be able to complete the posts, to watch these videos in full. And in doing so, you not only will probably see much higher scores on your posts and your grades, but you're going to retain a lot more. This is going to be a class that's easier to digest, and theoretically, one that you're going to take a lot more enjoyment from as you progress. And that's leading me to the very last thing that I always suggest for students who want to do well in this class. If you can find ways to enjoy the material, find ways to link it to your life, find ways to really get the most out of things, it will not only help you do well, but it's going to make this class go by extremely fast. If you can keep all these things in mind, hopefully you can find a way to be successful in these online courses, which, as I've mentioned, can be pretty tough. Now, it's going to mark the end of the first part of our first module. What I want to do, though, before we close out is give you a brief history of where psychology came from so we can understand how it developed early on and how it got into some of the things that it's into today. But before we get into that material, I think this is a good time to take a little break. So if you can, take some time off, maybe grab the book if you haven't gotten it already, and read through the assigned readings for this module, and it should help you as you start to digest the first bit of real content-related information when we cover a history of psychology. Until I see you next time, take care and good luck with the next set of material.